Jesus spoke to Simon and said, "Simon, I have something to say to you." "Teacher," he replied, "speak." Amen. Do any of you, as Serena invited us to be children in our heart, some of us may remember when we were children, or maybe not even so children, that you received, especially, this would be for the women in our group, a letter that would say, "Dear Mrs. David Hobart." Do you remember those letters? Yeah? I remember the first time I saw one addressed to my mother, "Dear Mrs. William Swanson." And I thought, who's that? That's the first one. I'm like, it's my mother's title, but it's my father's name. It makes no sense. It's denying my mother a voice. It's saying that she is identified solely and only through her husband, not through herself. That she, as a person, was no longer invisible. Nothing that she said had much importance. She was just somebody's wife. Today's scriptures, all of them that we heard today, there are 5 women, you may have noted. 3 are given names. 2 are given identification because of their husband, but none of them spoke a word. Not a single one of the women had a voice. They were identified, they were told that they were there. There's all these statements about them, but we never hear from them. Silence from over 50% of the population of the world. Luke 8. It's interesting. We get this story right about the woman who washed Jesus' feet, and then we get this last couple verses where we hear Jesus, or the writer of Luke, say, well, then there are these women, right? This guy says there's these women hanging around with Jesus. He names them. Mary Magdalene, who was healed of 7 spirits, and Joanna, the wife of, right? And then Susanna. But it's the very last statement that it says they provided for them out of their resources. I hear a lot of questions, let me tell you, about the Bible. That's a part of my job, right? In my ministry. And people say to me, well, what about the women? Who made the food? Were there people that were not men? Or were there other female disciples? You may have thought about this yourself. And these 2 or 3 verses are the only ones before the cross that specifically mention women in the company of Jesus taking care of him. But they have no voice. They never speak. What does that say? And yet every single one of them played a huge part in the life of faith and of God. King David. Let's go back to King David. Biddy, you're right. Challenging story. Nasty, that's right. Now what you didn't get were the 2 chapters, literally, of the story of Uriah the Hittite before what you heard. Good thing, we would still be sitting here listening to Uriah the Hittite. Well, Uriah is exactly what it said, was a poor soldier citizen. David wanted his wife. He sent him into battle, made sure that he was killed. This is King David. he took Uriah the Hittite, who, if you may have noted here, doesn't have a name. She's only identified as connected to her husband. What was David? Does anybody remember before he was king? Back in first, he was a shepherd. What does a shepherd do, Rich? Cares, provides. He's a steward. It is someone who takes, we had Good Shepherd Sunday not long ago and had those sheep and would shepherd them along and make sure they had food, make sure they had what they needed for life to take care of their needs. He provided for them. Being king, he kind of forgot what it meant to be a boy. He wasn't king as a boy. He wasn't even planned to be king. His father was not the king. Jesse, the prophet of God, went out to anoint him. Thank you. Thank you. The prophet went out to anoint Jesse's son. Thank you, Serena. We need biblical scholars. And he forgot. He forgot what it meant to shepherd, what it meant to be a steward, what it meant to care for and to provide for. So did Simon. You may have noted. Simon did not care or steward, provide that day when Jesus walked into his house. Jesus was quite critical of him, if you may have noted there. Serena made it very evident in her voice. You gave me no kiss. You did not wash my feet. You did not offer gifts of hospitality. You did not care. You were not a steward of your household. But then there's this woman, and Simon was like, she's not a good woman. She's a woman of the street. She has no voice. She's the most silent of all the women in this story at first look. So she sits there, right? And she sits behind Jesus. Now, if we were at Simon's house, Jesus would be lying on a couch, right? And his feet would be out, and she would be standing at his feet, not kneeling before him, at his side. She washed his feet with her tears and anointed them. But the entire story is about her. Did you notice that? She had the most amazing central voice in the entire day, without speaking a single word, without saying boo to anybody. And Jesus said to her, to Simon, listen, I'm going to say something to you. And Simon got all excited. He knew that Jesus was a prophet walking around to say things. And so Simon said, speak. Speak. And Jesus spoke the woman's truth. He spoke the hope of this one who was outside the love of God. This one who was outside the love of community. This one who was known as a sinner and outside was given voice. And Jesus said, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you about God. Listening is harder than doing, isn't it? It's one of the hardest things there is in Simon was unwilling to listen. David was unwilling to a point to listen. Jesus called Simon to listen. Being a steward of Jesus' feet, which is who this woman was, listened first. She listened to hear. She listened to the words of Jesus. She listened to the world around her to know who God is and was and will be. And then did something about it. She started first by opening the ears, not moving the hands. Being a steward, being someone who cares and shepherds and moves and loves, is one who listens first. You know, we get to the fall and we talk about a stewardship campaign, right? And we think about giving, right, as our first action. Well, we're here to give. Jesus says no. He said listen. The steward of the life of Jesus is to listen. 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 Those women provided for Jesus out of their resources. They listened to Jesus. And then they did. I know that for me, I want to jump in and do things first. And then turn around and, oh, I didn't listen to this. Oh, I didn't hear that. Oh, I'm going to go do this first. God says no. The stewardship of listening is the gift that we are given today. Of silence, of sitting, of hearing, of loving. Knowing the voices that aren't